So, as mentioned, today is the memorial of Saints Timothy and Titus, and it's no coincidence that it follows right on the heels of yesterday's conversion, the feast day of the conversion of St. Paul. We see right away the fruits of Paul's conversion, him being generative in Timothy and Titus, two bishops of the church, two people that were very close companions to Paul, fellow workers and laborers in the vineyard. And what we see today, there's two options for our first reading. We read his letter to Timothy. We also have Titus, so kind of give Titus the slight today. But Timothy, what we see come out here in Paul's letters, these pastoral letters to Timothy, have two in the scriptures for Timothy and one to Titus, is you see just an abundance of love being poured out. You see encouragement. You see a desire for Paul to strengthen, as he even calls in the opening of these, like, my child Timothy. And I just want to just make a couple notes we just hear of 8 verses, the beginning of Paul's first letter to Timothy. And, he says, I am grateful to God. And just imagine, like, Paul, when Timothy when Paul left Timothy, I think the second time as he's leaving Ephesus, it says that, Timothy just wept as Paul's leaving. Like, you don't know when the next time you're going to see. It's not like you can send a quick email or a text. And so imagine Timothy reading this and probably just weeping as he's reading it. Paul's probably weeping as he writes it. And Paul to Timothy says, I am grateful to God whom I worship with a clear conscience as my ancestors did. I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. So, imagine, like, Paul is able to say, I'm remembering you every day. I'm praying for you every day, both during the day and at night. So again, imagine Timothy receiving this, like, what it feels like to be thought of, to be continued to be cared for by his spiritual father. And Paul says to Timothy, he goes on and says, I yearn to see you again, recalling your tears. Again, he's referring to when he leaves Timothy, and Timothy, in another spot, Timothy's weeping, is wanting to go with Paul, and Paul says, no, stay. He says, I remember recalling your tears so that I may be filled with joy. And so again, Paul's even recalling Timothy's friendship and his tears so that he can continue to be strengthened, filled with joy. As I recall your sincere faith, first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, that I'm confident also lives in you. And then there's this shift, and he says, for this reason, I remind you to stir into flame. So initially, it's like Paul's even writing this for himself to be filled with love, encouragement, as he's struggling in ministry, right? And then also Timothy being persecuted, Paul's being persecuted. Stir into flame the gift of God that you have through the imposition of my hands. When he was ordained, when he became bishop, he's reminding Timothy to tap into that, to persevere, to keep going. And so maybe, just for us, we just think that we see the benefit of this letter, imagining the benefit of this letter for Paul, of him conveying his heart to Timothy, imagining the benefit for Timothy, even us receiving encouragement from it, love. And so maybe it's even like the challenge for us is to consider, like, who might benefit ourselves, like, that the Lord wants to convey this appreciation for, that's had an impact in our faith, in our life. Coincidentally, right, he points to his grandmother of Timothy, Lois. My grandma's Lois, and she's probably watching right now, right? So to thank Grandma Lois for me, my mom, my other grandma, who might be watching too, but to thank them, and to realize the fruit that can come from that, similar to the fruit of this letter. And sadly enough, like, I think I don't do it enough, that here's a letter, and it's all the more easy for us to do it today. whether it's through physically seeing somebody, whether it's shooting an email, whether it's a phone call. Paul didn't have that to do with Timothy, but he certainly took a time to write this letter to him, in which we all can benefit from now.